My name is Jamise Stidham, and today I will be giving a presentation on sibling abuse. I'll discuss the prevalence of it, the consequences of sibling abuse, and treatment programs that can help. Okay, let's get started. One study executed in 2011 at Harvard Medical School defined physical, family, and sibling abuse by asking the following question to subjects as a part of their self-report survey. Have you ever been physically hurt or attacked by someone, such as a parent or other family member or friend? For example, have you ever been struck, kicked, bitten, pushed, or otherwise physically hurt? As a part of this study, there are a couple other determining factors as to whether something was abuse or not. One was whether or not the victim received or needed to receive medical attention. 2, if the abuse resulted in permanent injury. And 3, if it hadn't, it qualified as abuse if the victim had experienced at least 4 abusive events of a less serious degree. Defining sexual sibling abuse. Defining sexual sibling abuse is a little bit harder, and I'll talk about that in a second, but first I want to say the study that I mentioned on the last slide also defined sexual sibling abuse by asking this question as a part of their survey as well. The question was, have you ever been forced into doing more sexually than you wanted to, or were you too young to understand? By sexually, we mean being forced against your will into contact with sexual parts of your own body or his or her body. As I said, it's a little bit harder to define sexual sibling abuse for a number of reasons. A study done at Illinois State University discussed the lack of definition that there is. The reason being, 2 of the main reasons being that even though sexual abuse among siblings is the most common type of family abuse, it is still downplayed as normal childhood curiosity and sexual exploration when in fact it is actually abuse. The other reason is that sexual sibling abuse is very underreported. Parents and families often feel like it's just family business that they need to keep to themselves, instead of reporting it and getting help for their children. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about what the difference is. Like, how do you know when when a sibling is abusing another sibling, or when it's just normal curiosity? So here's a list of a few things that mean that it's abuse, that sibling sexual abuse has occurred or is occurring. If the activity is intrusive or painful, if oral to genital or genital to genital contact has occurred with another child in the home, explicit, if the child is engaging in explicit simulation of sexual intercourse, or if forced unwanted penetration of any body part happens. Now I'm going to talk about the prevalence of sibling abuse. I have statistics from a few different studies here. As I said, it's very underreported. So a lot of the studies that I read talked about how it is likely that the numbers are a little bit higher because nobody ever reports it because they think it's normal or because they're too afraid to. So it is thought sibling sexual abuse is thought to be the most common type of family abuse and incest. Although seldom reported, studies have proven that sibling sexual abuse and incest is likely to occur 3 to 5 times more often than father-daughter abuse or incest, which was incredibly shocking to me because father-daughter incest is kind of the main one that you hear about. Another study done in 2000 found that sibling incest is twice as likely to happen in the home as parental incest. In 1980, so I have a couple earlier studies here, but in 1980, a retrospective study was done on a sample of college students in which 13% of the sample reported having experienced sibling sexual abuse and incest. In 1988, a similar study was done in Australia that revealed that 57% of people who experienced family abuse endured some type of sibling sexual abuse. So that's just, I want to point out really quick that a lot of times sibling sexual abuse can be comorbid with another type of abuse in the home, whether it's like mother against father, father against mother, parents against another child. I also wanted something that I found that like I didn't put in my presentation was that the adverse effects of witnessing sibling abuse, like seeing one sibling seeing another sibling being abused by whoever in the family, has just as many negative outcomes as having been sexually abused themselves. Also, 95% of the time the sibling abuse is happening inside of the home, and 68% of the time there's a weapon involved. Okay, so we just talked a little bit about some consequences. Consequences of sibling sexual abuse are some of the most damaging of all forms of family abuse. Victims of this type of abuse are more likely to recreate the victim role later in life. They have struggles with self-esteem and identity issues. Most victims, as an immediate consequence, experience issues with fear, guilt, anger, and shame. Other consequences include severe depression and anxiety, psychotropic substance abuse, suicide or suicidal ideations, problems with self-esteem, especially in relationships, and problem forming healthy relationships and expressing intimacy in a healthy way. Now I want to talk about how abused children and their families get the treatment they need. So when I was doing my research, I found this really cool family-centered approach. They started as of 2013, the Children's Protection Society in Melbourne, Australia developed this approach specifically for sibling sexual abuse through their sexual abuse counseling and prevention program. The key is to help both the victim and the child who has engaged in harmful sexual behavior, as well as establish a new sense of safety and security for the family as a whole. Sometimes the offending sibling does have to be removed from the home, but family reunification is the ultimate goal with this approach. It's not about punishing either child. Since children offenders can't be treated the same as adult offenders, that's kind of the reason the SACP and CPS have combined the victim approach with the offender approach instead of having the either or thing that most treatment programs have. The key objectives are, when working to aid victims of sibling sexual abuse, therapy should be of service to both the victim and the sibling equally. It's important to see all family members as a part of the process. This contributes to restoring a safe environment where the children and family, like parents and everyone, can heal together. Planning arrangements and the last one is planning arrangements for safety has to be the result of a partnership with parents and the children. This approach offers two types of therapy. One is family therapy, which I've kind of already talked about, just stresses the perspective of each party involved, the victim, the offending sibling, and the parents. So the perspective of the victim, it's just important to consider factors like making sure they understand that what happened to them is not their fault. Making sure they have processed any feelings of shame, blame, or guilt, and make sure that they are addressing any adverse effects of the abuse. And all of these things will give them like an age appropriate understanding of what has happened, and it'll also help them feel like when they do have to come in contact with that sibling again, that there is a sense of physical and boundaries and emotional safety for both children. As far as the perspective of the young person or the offending sibling, make sure that they also have an ability to understand and express like what they did to their sibling, why they did it. Make sure that they're able to express that they can understand it. They understand the influences and motivations behind the harmful behavior that they have engaged in against their sibling. And it's important that part of it is to make sure that the offending sibling has the ability to address other difficult behaviors that may trigger sexually harmful ones. As far as the perspective of the parents, it's part of the therapeutic process for them is to just make sure that they are being supportive. It's not about punishing one child and taking the side of the other child. It's about strengthening the relationship between each child with their parents, because that makes a huge difference in how each child is going to heal.